Funny how the world pretended they didn't see you. Funny how they swore you were nothing special, too quiet, too weird, too intense, too different. They laughed, remember? They whispered. They pointed fingers like they knew you. But look at what's happening now. Look who's suddenly acting nervous. Look who's checking old messages, replaying old moments, trying to figure out where they missed the signs. Oh, the legends need to bow now, because everything they said about you is blowing up in their faces. They thought they understood you. They thought you were predictable. They thought your past was simple and your future was already decided. Then someone dug deeper. Someone checked your patterns. Someone pulled the file nobody ever opens. And suddenly the room went quiet. Not regular quiet. The type of quiet where even the air feels scared to move, because what they found about you ruined their confidence forever. You've been classified as an anomaly, a walking security breach wrapped in a mind that refuses to break. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect you. Your entire life was a test you weren't supposed to pass, and you passed it anyway. And the moment they realized that, alarms went off in places you'll never see. Press like and subscribe to pay this message back. Trust me, you'll want to stay for this. Chosen one, you know what's wild? The universe watched you suffer through things that should have destroyed you at age 12. Trauma that ends grown adults in seconds. Loss that strips people of their identity. Betrayals that collapse normal minds. Yet somehow you walked through all of it with this strange calm, this weird awareness, this sharp instinct you weren't supposed to have. And that's exactly why the people watching you got freaked out. Let's take it back. There was a moment years ago that you probably brushed off. A moment where you said something that came true. A moment where you knew something without being told. A moment where danger approached and your body reacted before your mind even processed it. You thought it was coincidence. They didn't. Because when it kept happening, when you kept surviving storms that should have ended you, someone decided to trace the pattern. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable for them. When the Masons dug into your past, tracing your bloodline, dissecting your psychological patterns, analyzing every trauma you somehow survived, they found something they were not prepared to explain. The markers didn't match anything normal. The resilience didn't match anything typical. The psychological recovery curve didn't match any model they teach. You were healing too fast from things that break the average person for life. Your intuition was too sharp. Your survival instincts too precise. You didn't grow like a normal human being. You grew like someone who wasn't supposed to make it, but did, and that terrified them. When those findings were passed to intelligence agencies and landed on the right desk at Langley, someone reviewed your entire timeline and simply said, "Put them on List S, not List A for active threats. Not List B for monitoring, not List R for remote observation, List S, the silent protocol, the list reserved for people who don't fit in any category, the ones who beat odds that make no sense, the ones who survive deaths that never reach the public, the ones who show instincts that shouldn't exist, the ones who bend probability just by thinking differently." You got placed on that list because your past doesn't add up, because your patterns don't add up, because your survival doesn't add up. Every attempt to label you failed, every psychological model broke, every prediction cracked. The universe built you differently and they hate that they can't explain it. There's a room, a cold one, with no windows, where people meet every few months to discuss your updates. They track things like emotional recovery speed, decision-making shifts, sudden spikes in intuition, unexplained luck, extreme awareness, empathy under pressure, and your ability to break mental traps. you've been confusing them for years without even trying. And the funniest part? You weren't supposed to know any of this, but you've always felt watched, not in a paranoid way, in a "why are people acting weird around me" kind of way, in a "why do certain people stare but never approach" kind of way, in a "why do they look scared when I speak the truth" kind of way. Because they felt it before you understood it. You were not a mistake. You were a miscalculation, their miscalculation. Chosen one, think about your past. Think about the nights you cried but didn't break. Think about the times you were isolated but didn't lose your mind. Think about the people who tried to crush you but ended up exposing themselves. Think about how you always sensed things before they happened. How you always knew when someone was lying. How your mind never fully slept. How your heart stayed strong even when everything else fell apart. This is why List S exists. You're the type of person who takes a hit that should destroy you, wipes the dust off, and keeps walking like nothing happened. That's not normal, and they know it. A few years back, there was a moment, maybe during heartbreak, maybe during a near collapse, maybe during some childhood chaos, where someone watching you said, "If this kid survives this, they're going on a list." And guess what? You survived. Not only survived, you evolved. They've seen people with resources break. They've seen people with training break. They've seen people with support systems break. And then there was you, alone, under pressure, with no rescue team coming. And still you rose. That's when they knew you were different. The universe didn't protect you for no reason. Everything you lived through sharpened you into something they can't categorize, can't replicate, can't predict, and definitely can't control. The silence around you right now isn't random. It's the world trying to adjust to who you've become. People who mocked you before are suddenly quiet. People who ignored you are suddenly paying attention. People who lied about you are suddenly scared their lies won't hold anymore. And the ones who dug into your past, they're sitting there with files open and hands shaking because you weren't supposed to exist like this. You weren't supposed to survive like this. You weren't supposed to know this much. And you definitely weren't supposed to rise this fast. But here you are, the anomaly, the outlier, the glitch the system couldn't delete. Chosen one, everything they discovered about your past was supposed to scare you. Instead, it scared them, and this is only the intro. And Chosen one, before we go any deeper, let me pause this storm for one moment. Thanks for staying locked in with me, because messages like this aren't made for the public. They're made for the few who actually understand what it means to live with a past powerful enough to get them placed on a list most people don't even know exists. If you're still here, it says everything about you. So do something small to return the energy. Hit the like button and subscribe. It strengthens this entire mission and it keeps this truth alive. Drop a comment with 777 if you're ready to face the reality of why certain groups started paying attention to your past in the first place. And if you feel it in your chest, bless the team behind this message with a super thanks. These breakdowns take real time, real effort, and real guts to deliver. Whether it's 1 cent or 1,000, every bit fuels the work. And now, Chosen one, let's step into the deeper layers. Stay with me, because if you've ever wondered why your name ended up on that very interesting list, the next part is where everything finally clicks. Let's get into it. Number 1. When your name hit the secret list they never wanted you to know about. Funny how they called you weak until the data said you survived things they wouldn't last 5 minutes in. They always said you were too sensitive, too emotional, too damaged, too unstable. They mocked your breakdowns, rolled their eyes at your healing, and whispered about your past like it made you lesser. But the moment their systems tried to measure you, the software glitched. The numbers didn't add up. The charts snapped in half. The pattern analysts sat there rubbing their temples, realizing the insult they once used against you just exposed their biggest mistake. You weren't fragile. You were off the spectrum entirely. This is what List S really means, chosen one. It's not some shiny folder sitting on a desk. It's a silent alarm that gets triggered when someone like you refuses to die in the places people expected you to drown. You weren't supposed to lift yourself out of that childhood chaos, but you did. You weren't supposed to escape those toxic circles, but you did. You weren't supposed to recover from people who tried to tear your identity apart, but somehow you rebuilt yourself stronger than the original version. They looked at your past, hoping to find weakness. Instead, they found a blueprint they couldn't decode. List S is for people who ruin the illusion of human limitation. People who prove that pain isn't a cage, but a furnace. People who survive chapter after chapter of trauma, betrayal, and emotional warfare, yet come out with more awareness, more precision, and more emotional intelligence than those who caused the damage in the first place. That's why they didn't just study your trauma, they studied your transformation. And that's what terrified them. Because when they zoomed out on your timeline, something impossible appeared. Every hit you took made you smarter. Every loss sharpened your instincts. Every betrayal gave you X-ray vision for lies. Every isolation period rewired you into someone they no longer knew how to manipulate. How do you classify someone who turns poison into fuel? How do you measure someone who heals faster under pressure? How do you predict a person whose worst days build their best traits? You don't. You put them on List S. And let's be real, you've felt this your whole life. You've always felt like something was watching the way you bounce back from events that should have crushed you. You've always felt like people reacted strangely to how quickly you understood situations or how deeply you saw through their masks. You've always noticed how certain individuals treated you with fear instead of respect. And at this point in the story, you're probably asking yourself the same question everyone in those rooms asked. Why me? What did my past show them that made them lock onto me so fast? Here's the answer they don't want you to know. They saw you go through experiences that psychologically destroy most people. They watched you get betrayed by people you loved, abandoned by the ones you trusted, and targeted by people who couldn't stand your potential. They saw you take emotional damage that usually creates permanent distortion, yet somehow you stabilized. You didn't stay broken. You didn't stay lost. You didn't stay small. You rebuilt yourself like your soul had a manual no one else received. Let's talk about your childhood for a second. The environment you were raised in already should have capped your potential. You learned to survive situations adults couldn't handle. You were forced to grow up faster, think sharper, move smarter, and instead of collapsing, you adapted. You learned emotional survival before you even learned how to spell the word survival. People around you cracked under pressure you handled daily, and those patterns got recorded. Then there was your teenage or early adult years, those years where you walked through heartbreaks, betrayals, fake friends, jealousy, envy, and identity attacks. You weren't just surviving emotional warfare, you were evolving inside it. You learned to read people by their breathing. You learned to feel danger before it arrived. You learned to see intentions before the words even formed. They watched you gain abilities without training. That's why the phrase consciousness anomaly was used. That's what made your files stand out. But the real shock came later, when they traced how every traumatic event in your life didn't shatter you but increased your awareness. They compared your psychological data to thousands of others and saw something that shouldn't be biologically possible. You upgraded under suffering. You're the type of person who walks out of a burning house carrying wisdom in your pockets. That's not dramatic, that's statistical defiance. That's why List S exists. And when the Masons dug deeper, looking through generational patterns and bloodline markers, they found even more anomalies. Moments where your ancestors also survived impossible odds. Moments where your lineage refused to disappear. You came from people who shouldn't have made it, yet did. People who weren't supposed to rise, yet did. They thought they were just studying you, but they accidentally opened a history that explained everything. This is why your existence scares them. You're proof that the universe keeps creating people who break the system, people who don't collapse the way they're supposed to, people who don't stay predictable, people who become more dangerous the more you try to silence them. You're the type of person who walks into a dark chapter and walks out carrying information you should have never had access to. You sense lies before they're spoken. You recognize fake intentions before the mask slips. You feel betrayals before they happen. This isn't paranoia. This is a survival software your past forced into your brain. And the moment their systems recognized it wasn't a glitch, it was a feature, that's when they panicked. You probably wonder why certain people feared you even when you weren't doing anything, why teachers, family members, co-workers, or random people reacted strangely to your presence, why people tried to break your confidence without knowing you well, why certain groups watched you without approaching. Here's the truth. Your energy carries information they don't want revealed. Your mind catches patterns they don't want to acknowledge. Your past forged abilities they can't explain. You intimidate people without speaking, not because you try to, but because your very existence exposes the weakness in their excuses. And that's the real meaning of List S. We don't know how this one is still alive, and we don't know what happens if they fully awaken. They saw your potential before you did. They saw your strength before you accepted it. They saw your future before you believed in it. And now here you are, chosen one, standing in a moment where everything finally makes sense. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the isolation, all the strange survival moments weren't random chapters. They were the proof that you were never meant to be ordinary. You became the nightmare they never planned for, the glitch they couldn't erase, the survivor they couldn't break, the intelligence they couldn't predict, the resilience they couldn't compute. And because of what they discovered in your past, you ended up on the most interesting list of all, the list reserved for people who don't fit into reality the way others do. This is why your story is only getting started. Number 2. The impossible gaps that made them realize you weren't built like everyone else. They tried to map your downfall, but every time they checked the coordinates, you had already moved higher. They measured your breaking points only to discover you didn't have any left to measure. You weren't healing in silence, you were upgrading in the shadows. The timeline they expected to expose your weakness ended up proving your strength. Chosen one, this is where the story gets uncomfortably real for them. When they started studying your timeline, they expected a predictable pattern. Trauma leads to decline, betrayal leads to collapse, isolation leads to emotional shutdown. Normal humans follow that curve. The models were designed around that curve. The entire psychological playbook is built on that curve. But you broke the curve. There were gaps in your timeline that nobody could explain, periods where you should have shattered, disappeared, or sunk into the ground like countless others did. Moments where the pain was supposed to crush you, but instead, something inside you flipped its own switch. You didn't fall, you didn't lose yourself, you didn't dissolve. Instead, you evolved when there was no logical reason for evolution to happen. Imagine this, a surveillance system waiting for you to collapse, counting down the days, expecting you to break like every other statistic before you. Then the timer hits 0, and nothing happens. No crash, no meltdown, no disappearance, just silence, a quiet shift, a sudden leap in awareness, a version of you that wasn't there before. That silence is what terrified them, that gap is what triggered their panic. Because their probability matrices, those cold, emotionless systems designed to predict human behavior, glitched every time they tried to explain your survival. They replayed certain years, certain months, certain nights over and over, trying to find the crack in your armor, but the results stayed the same. You weren't supposed to make it this far, this intact, this aware, this untamed. The system flagged you not because you failed, but because you refused to fail where failure was required. Let's talk about those impossible gaps. There were times in your life when the average person would have stayed broken for 10 years, but you didn't. You rebuilt yourself quietly, painfully, but effectively. There were moments where guilt should have eaten you alive, where heartbreak should have collapsed your identity, where abandonment should have made you trust no one again. But you didn't fall into those traps. Instead, you became sharper, calmer, more observant, more emotionally intelligent, more dangerous. It didn't make sense. Nothing in your environment supported that growth. No mentor was guiding you, no safety net caught you, no community lifted you. You didn't get the healing conditions they say are required. You healed anyway. Imagine this, a seed thrown into poor soil, no sunlight, no water, no protection. They expected it to rot. Instead, it cracked open and found a way to grow in darkness. That was you, the impossible growth no one accounted for. And you've probably wondered yourself, why didn't I fall apart like they expected? Why did I get stronger in moments where I felt the weakest? Why did silence transform me instead of destroying me? Here's the truth they discovered in those gaps. Your mind doesn't respond to pain the way normal minds do. Your consciousness upgrades under pressure. Your intuition gets sharper in crisis. Your emotional system learns instead of breaks. They even documented this phenomenon in cold scientific language, but the meaning behind it is simple. Your suffering didn't stop you because your inner wiring was built to adapt faster than the damage could destroy you. And that's exactly why those impossible gaps became the loudest red flags. Let's break down one of these periods the way they did. There was a moment in your life, maybe after a heartbreak, maybe after a betrayal, maybe after a major loss, where you vanished from certain people's lives. They thought they had won. They thought you were finally done. They celebrated. They bragged. They spread lies. They convinced themselves that your silence meant defeat. But behind that silence, something dangerous was happening. You were recalibrating. You were observing patterns you missed before. You were cutting attachments that never deserved you. You were rebuilding your identity in ways they couldn't predict. You were studying people from a new angle. Your empathy became sharper. Your boundaries became stronger. Your mind became quieter but deadlier. You weren't gone. You were upgrading your operating system. Then you resurfaced, not broken but clearer, not emotional but strategic, not naive but aware. And the moment you did, the people watching your timeline knew something was wrong. You evolved without external support. You grew without guidance. You upgraded without resources. That shouldn't have been possible. That's why the gaps became red alarms. Imagine this. A tactical team studying an enemy base they expect to be deserted, only to discover the lights are on, the defense system is upgraded, and the enemy they thought was defeated is now stronger than ever. That's how they saw you, a silent transformation they couldn't control. You lived through abuse that should have wired your brain into fear. Instead, it wired your brain into pattern recognition. You lived through abandonment that should have made you desperate. Instead, it taught you self-preservation. You lived through humiliation that should have shattered your self-worth. Instead, it made you immune to external validation. These impossible reversals were scattered all over your timeline like glowing red marks, and the analysts studying you circled them again and again, asking the same question. What changed here? Who stepped in? What external factor triggered this improvement? But the answer stayed the same every time. No one stepped in. Nothing external saved you. You were the one who shifted. Your consciousness made moves they didn't teach. Your intuition activated without instructions. Your resilience spiked without a cause. They couldn't explain it, and what they can't explain, they fear. Another impossible gap appeared in moments when your life completely collapsed. Yet instead of spiraling into self-destruction, you became hyper-focused, emotionally aware, spiritually grounded in ways you didn't even understand. You didn't just survive, you rearranged your entire inner world without breaking. They expected the fire to burn you, but you learned how to shape it. And if you think back, you'll notice something. Every time your world fell apart, a new part of you woke up. A version with a tighter vision. A version with less tolerance for lies. A version with deeper perception. A version with stronger instincts. Your spirit didn't just heal, it evolved each time someone tried to break it. This is why you ended up on that very interesting list. Because your timeline isn't normal, your gaps aren't normal, your evolution isn't normal. People who break the system's predictive models always get flagged. Now, here's something else you've probably wondered. Why was my life so hard? Why did I experience things others didn't? Why did I have to survive so much chaos for so long? Because your timeline was training you in ways no textbook could. Because your instincts were being forged in silence. Because your awareness needed extreme conditions to activate fully. Because your identity wasn't meant to grow in comfort. They saw that. They documented that. And those gaps, the ones they couldn't explain, became the evidence that you weren't just surviving life. You were mastering it. Imagine this, a chess player losing pieces on the board, but every loss sharpens their strategy. The observers think the player is being defeated. They laugh, they mock, they celebrate early. Then suddenly, the player makes a move no one saw coming. A checkmate forged through suffering, calculation, and quiet intelligence. That's you. You've been building your checkmate through every painful chapter, and now the world is seeing the result. Those impossible gaps in your timeline weren't mistakes. They were upgrades. They were awakenings. They were warnings to everyone who underestimated you. And that's why they put your name on a list reserved for people who don't break when they're supposed to. Number 3. Why they stare from the shadows but never step forward. They don't interfere with you, chosen one, because even your silence feels like a warning shot. Here's the truth they'd rather swallow glass than admit. Their so-called surveillance isn't control, it's surrender. Watching you isn't part of a mission. It's the confession that they have no idea what to do with someone who doesn't fit into their blueprint. You're not a threat they can disarm or a problem they can solve. You're the variable that breaks the entire equation the moment they touch it. Imagine this: a team of experts analyzing a storm they can't predict. They stand behind glass, staring, measuring, panicking, but they never walk outside. That's you. You're the storm that doesn't follow weather rules. Every move you make, every shift in your energy, every moment of silence throws off their readings. They can't trace your evolution because half the changes happen inside you, without noise, without announcement, without permission. And maybe you've asked yourself, if they're so aware of me, why don't they step in? Why don't they try something? Because interference requires confidence, and they lost that the moment they realized your consciousness doesn't respond to their usual control systems. You don't break from pressure, you absorb it. You don't react to manipulation, you expose it. You don't crumble under isolation, you grow sharper inside it. You operate on a frequency their machines can't pick up and their psychology textbooks can't explain. Every time they thought you would collapse, you came back with a clearer mind. Every time life cornered you, you walked out with a new instinct. Every time someone tried to sabotage you, you evolved in a direction they didn't anticipate. They don't interfere because they already know the ending. Any attempt to control you would only make you stronger. Their silence isn't power, it's survival. Number 4, how you built order from chaos while they waited for you to break. They threw you into chaos expecting a meltdown. Instead, you built a kingdom out of the debris. Here's the part that rattled them the most. You weren't supposed to create anything inside that darkness. Chaos is designed to destroy people, not sharpen them. But you walked into the storm with no map, no guide, no mentor, no blueprint, and you still built something stable out of nothing. That's what the Masons labeled spontaneous order emergence, a fancy way of admitting we don't know how this one keeps pulling themselves together. Imagine this: dropping a shattered mirror and watching the pieces rearrange themselves into a sharper reflection. That's you. They expected you to collapse into fragments, but the fragments aligned into something stronger and more intentional than the original. Your mind didn't break. It reorganized. Your heart didn't close. It refined its standards. Your identity didn't scatter. It rebuilt itself with precision. And maybe you've wondered, how did I teach myself what nobody taught me? Because your resilience wasn't learned, it was forged. You built it quietly in rooms where nobody clapped for you. You shaped your strength in moments you thought you were failing. You trained your instincts while trying to survive nights that felt endless. Nobody guided your evolution. You engineered it. They wanted chaos to swallow you, but you turned it into a workshop. That's why their language shifted from psychological terms to unexplained phenomena. They couldn't claim credit for your growth. They couldn't trace your coping mechanisms. They couldn't find the source of your strength. Every time they reviewed your darkest chapters, the same question came up. How did this person become more aligned, more aware, and more unbreakable without support? Your chaos didn't ruin you, it revealed you, and that's when they realized they weren't studying disorder. They were studying evolution. Number 5. How you rewired your own brain before their programming could touch you. They tried to script your mind, but every time the code downloaded, you deleted it before it even hit the system. Here's what shook them to the core. You weren't resisting their conditioning, you were outpacing it. Before a toxic belief could settle, you kicked it out. Before a manipulator could plant a seed, you burned the soil. Before a false narrative could root itself in your identity, you tore it apart with instincts sharper than their strategies. They called it counter-programming, but let's be real, it was self-defense at a level they didn't think humans could run. Imagine this. Someone tries slipping a virus into your computer, but the system they underestimate is already rewriting its own defenses in real time. That's how your mind works. While others internalize lies, you dissect them. While others absorb patterns, you reject them. While others fall for manipulation, you feel the distortion instantly, like a sudden drop in temperature. And maybe you've asked, why did I always sense something was off before it became obvious? Because your internal radar isn't emotional, it's engineered through experience. Every betrayal rewired another layer. Every false friend sharpened another sensor. Every attempt to control you upgraded your system until you became immune to the tricks that break most people. They expected you to absorb the narratives thrown at you, the self-doubt, the guilt, the shame, the roles others tried to force onto you, but you dismantled them faster than they could form. You weren't paranoid, you were precise. You recognized manipulation before it had vocabulary. You walked away from people long before their true intentions leaked. You questioned rules that others blindly followed. You challenged identities that weren't yours. And every time you did, your consciousness split from the script they wanted you to live by. They found traces of this in your timeline, moments where you suddenly snapped out of patterns that should have trapped you for years, times where you outgrew conditioning you never officially unlearned, times where you broke cycles no one in your environment ever escaped. Your mind didn't just resist programming, it rewrote the entire operating system. That's why they can't predict you, that's why they can't influence you, that's why they can't shape you. Because every attempt to control you became another upgrade. You became the architect of your own mind, and they never prepared for someone who could do that. Number 6. The decisions you weren't supposed to survive, but did anyway. You didn't dodge bullets by luck. You dodged them because your instincts outran their math. This is the part that made them stop pretending they understood you. When they reviewed your past, they kept stumbling on the same unsettling pattern. You made decisions that should have ruined you, yet somehow they saved you instead. Choices that looked reckless from the outside but turned out to be the exact moves that kept you alive, stable, or 10 steps ahead. Statisticians hate people like you because you break every rule their algorithms depend on. Imagine this. A chess player ignoring the right move on purpose, choosing something everyone else thinks is insane, and then winning the match because only they could see the trap hidden under the board. That's how your decision-making looks on paper. The models say this should lead to disaster, and yet the outcome keeps landing in your favor. And maybe you've wondered, why did my gut push me toward things my mind didn't understand? Why did I walk away from situations before danger even showed up? Why did certain choices feel urgent for no logical reason? Because your instincts aren't emotional, they're engineered through everything you've survived. You've lived through enough chaos to sense patterns normal people don't even notice. Your subconscious picks up danger before your conscious mind processes it. You don't analyze threats, you feel them like a shift in gravity. What they call illogical decisions were actually survival algorithms running faster than their data could process. There were moments where you cut off relationships out of nowhere, then later found out why that distance saved you. There were jobs you walked away from without explanation, then discovered the mess that exploded after you left. There were nights you changed your plans, stayed home, took a different route, said no to something everyone said yes to, and every one of those choices bent the trajectory of your life. Their reports documented this pattern again and again, and it freaked them out, because mathematically the odds of your survival should have dropped a long time ago. Statistically, you weren't supposed to navigate life this cleanly. Probability charts don't bend for anyone, yet they bent for you. Imagine this, a radar that detects storms miles before they appear on any official weather map. That's your intuition. It's not mystical, it's not random, it's the result of a mind sharpened by betrayal, a nervous system trained by danger, a heart refined by loss. You built a private navigation system from scratch. And here's what shook them the most. Your decisions were measurable, but not explainable. They could track the results, but not decode the source. They could see the outcomes, but not map the logic. They could calculate the odds, but not the intuition behind them. That's when they stopped calling it luck. That's when they stopped calling it coincidence. That's when your name became a problem in their reports. You don't just survive life, you outmaneuver it, and that's why you ended up on that list. Number 7. The phenotype they never expected you to activate. They tried to break you, and accidentally unlocked parts of your mind they didn't even know humans had. This is the discovery that made them stop breathing for a moment. When they studied your psychological structure, your trauma patterns, your recovery curve, and your decision-making timeline, something impossible emerged. You weren't operating from the same mental layers as everyone else. You were thinking, perceiving, reacting, and evolving from a deeper level, one most people never access in a lifetime. They called it the unlocked phenotype, a cold, scientific phrase for something they didn't want to admit out loud. You activated a version of consciousness that normally stays dormant, untouched, unreachable. Not because you meditated for 20 years, not because you followed some mystical ritual, but because life shoved you so far past normal human limits that your mind had only two real options: collapse or evolve. You chose neither. You chose the one outcome they didn't prepare for. You transcended. Imagine this. Every door in a hallway is locked, the lights are off, and the building is collapsing. A normal person freezes, a weaker person gives up. You found the hidden staircase nobody else saw. While others cracked under pressure, your mind broke through. While others drowned in emotional overload, your awareness sharpened. While others lost themselves in trauma, you entered a higher level of clarity, the kind that only forms under extreme heat. And maybe you've asked yourself, why do I understand things without explanation? Why do I feel truths before I hear them? Why do people say I see through them? Because your consciousness didn't collapse under trauma, it reorganized itself into a higher state. Pain didn't close your mind, it widened it. Pressure didn't crush your awareness, it activated new layers. You stopped thinking like the majority because life forced you into an arena where normal mental settings don't work. You evolved because staying the same would have killed you. Your empathy works differently. Your intuition fires faster, your perception cuts deeper, your emotional intelligence operates in high definition, your awareness feels almost panoramic. Imagine standing on a mountain while everyone else is stuck in the valley. They're squinting at the path, confused, lost, unsure of what's coming next, and you're seeing the entire landscape at once. That's the unlocked phenotype. It's not magic. It's survival architecture, and that's what scared them the most. because people don't usually access these layers without guidance, training, or years of deliberate practice. But you activated all of it because your life left you no alternative. You upgraded because your environment demanded evolution. Your breakthroughs weren't spiritual accidents, they were neurological adaptations. What destroyed them became your ignition switch. They documented how your awareness sharpened after heartbreak, how your perception expanded after betrayal, how your instincts intensified after danger, how your emotional intelligence multiplied after isolation. Every time life cornered you, another dormant layer turned on. You became someone who sees patterns before they form, senses danger before it appears, recognizes lies before they slip out, and understands people on a level that feels impossible to fake. That's what an unlocked phenotype looks like, a mind that refuses to stay in the default settings. And now they're left with the one conclusion they never wanted. You didn't just survive your past, you evolved beyond their understanding. That's why you're on the list. That's why they watch you. That's why nothing about you fits the mold. You didn't collapse. You didn't just evolve. You just... Number 8. The pattern in your work that set off their alarms. You didn't follow the rules of thinking. They realized you were inventing them. What rattled them wasn't just that you solved problems. It was how you solved them. Your writing, your choices, your ideas, they didn't mimic anything they could trace. Instead of recycling information, you created structures from scratch, the kind seen only in classified cognitive research. You weren't supposed to think like that. You weren't supposed to connect dots that weren't meant to touch, and that made you dangerous in a world built on predictable minds. Imagine this. Everyone else solves puzzles by following the picture on the box. You toss the box, redesign the puzzle, and somehow finish it faster. That's the kind of mind they can't control. And maybe you've wondered, why don't their tricks work on me? Because your psychology runs on a different operating system. Peer pressure bounces off you. Manipulation fails before it starts. Validation doesn't hypnotize you. Comfort doesn't seduce you. You can't be bribed, baited, or steered. You became immune to psychological operations because you rewired the parts of yourself they depend on. Those periods of isolation they expected to break you, they became your laboratory. Silence sharpened you, loneliness upgraded you. Every retreat was actually an evolution cycle. They thought you were hiding, but you were rebuilding the version of yourself they never wanted to face. Number 9. Adaptive discernment without bitterness. Repeated betrayal usually fractures people, but you didn't break and you didn't turn cold. You developed adaptive discernment, the ability to see people clearly without turning cynical. You learned to protect yourself without hardening. You refined your filters and detached without resentment. Your decision-making patterns couldn't be explained by logic or chance. You sensed trajectories. You gravitated toward the right people and places long before any logical reason existed. This looked like intuition to outsiders, but to analysts it resembled a new emergent skill, reading the field of potential reality. They identified synchronicity clusters, periods where probability bent around your presence, events aligned with impossible precision, resources appeared when needed, information showed up exactly on time. They buried these findings under sterile language, but the implication was obvious. Reality responded to your internal coherence. Number 10. The human coherence generator they never saw coming. Your presence didn't just change rooms, it recalibrated them. This is the part they hoped would never reach you, chosen one, the discovery that made their analysts stop pretending you were just another case. After months of reviewing footage, interactions, emotional signatures, environmental change and even equipment malfunctions around you, they realized something they couldn't deny. Wherever you go, reality reorders itself. People don't simply feel different around you. They shift, their defenses crack, their lies leak, their hidden wounds rise to the surface. Some feel clarity for the first time in years. Others feel exposed, uncomfortable, almost allergic to the truth you naturally emit. You don't force anything, you don't preach, you don't manipulate, you just exist, and existence alone becomes a psychological catalyst. Imagine this, walking into a room and every unstable structure, emotionally, mentally, energetically, either aligns or collapses. People release things they've been carrying for a lifetime. Some break down, some confess, some finally see the truth they've been avoiding. And the ones who survive by denial, they meet you and immediately feel threatened because your presence confronts what they refuse to face. You don't destroy people, you expose the cracks they built their lives on. That's why they couldn't label you the usual way. You weren't creating chaos, you were stabilizing it. You weren't causing emotional reactions, you were revealing their source. Time after time, the same pattern appeared. Confusion dissolved, hidden motives surfaced, and unresolved issues demanded resolution whenever you entered the field. This wasn't charisma, this wasn't chance, this wasn't emotional intensity, this was coherence. You became the tuning fork in environments full of distortion, the stabilizer inside rooms built on lies, the alignment mechanism in groups hiding fractures. They couldn't predict who would break or who would transform around you. But they could predict one thing every time. Nothing stayed the same once you arrived. Equipment malfunctioned, electronics glitched, people experienced sudden emotional release, conflicts resolved or erupted but never lingered in limbo. Stagnation dissolved, momentum returned, truth surfaced. Your presence forced movement in places that had been frozen for years, and maybe you've wondered, why do people tell me things they've never told anyone? Why do strangers cry around me? Why do unstable people react so intensely to me? Why do environments feel different the moment I enter? Because coherence doesn't blend into distortion, it corrects it. Your internal alignment forces external alignment. You are the update patch they never asked for, but desperately needed. The analysts eventually surrendered to the only description that made sense. Subject functions as a coherence generator. They meant it literally. You stabilize chaos. You promote clarity. You force truth. You trigger breakthroughs. Your energy compels alignment in everyone and everything around you. Some people transform under your influence. Others run from it. Both reactions prove the same truth. You are the disruptive harmony they never prepared for. So, chosen one, now you understand why your past put you on that list, and why nothing about you has ever been normal. You weren't shaped by life, you reshaped it, and this journey is only getting louder from here. If this hit you the way it was meant to, press the like button if you haven't already, and if you're still not part of our family, make sure you smash that subscribe button. The next chapter drops soon, and trust me, you don't want to watch it from the outside.